evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2024 Dr. Bruce J. Nelson Class of 74 Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Josh Brake. I'm an assistant professor of engineering here at Harvey Mudd. And along with Kyle Thompson, who is director of learning programs, and Erica Dyson, the Willard W. Keith Jr. Fellow in the Humanities and Associate Professor of Religious Studies, serving as co-chair of the faculty committee planning this year's Nelson Lecture Series. This year's series is titled Learning in the Age of AI, and it's an exploration of the complex relationship between human learning and machine learning in the world of education and beyond. In this series, we have three industry experts. We had Sal Khan last month, founder of Khan Academy. Tonight, we get to hear from John Warner, author and columnist, and in a month or so, we will hear from Emily Bender, a leading linguist professor, and they will help us to understand how people learn in the age of AI. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the generosity of the family of the late Bruce J. Nelson, class of 1974, for establishing this educational series to honor Bruce's memory. Bruce died unexpectedly in 1999, though not before having a tremendous impact on the many people whose lives he touched in an unconventional, eclectic, and irrepressible free spirit. He graduated from Harvey Mudd College as an independent program of studies major and later earned his master's in computer science from Stanford and his PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon. At the time of his death, he was the chief science officer at Cisco Systems. We're honored and grateful to the Nelson family for the opportunity we have each fall to host exceptional speakers who are at the forefront of their respective fields. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker. John Warner is a national voice on the teaching of writing, faculty labor, and institutional values, both as a frequent speaker and a longtime contributor to Inside Higher Ed, where his Just Visiting column has run weekly over 10 years. He is also the author of Why They Can't Write, Killing the Five-Paragraph Essay and Other Necessities, The Writer's Practice, Building Confidence in Your Nonfiction Writing, and Sustainable, Resilient, Free, The Future of Public Higher Education. He also has a forthcoming book, which I am personally very excited to read, and which he'll be talking a little bit about tonight, called How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI. A former college instructor with 20 years of experience across multiple different institutions, including the University of Illinois, Virginia Tech, Clemson, College of Charleston, Warner now works as a writer, editor, speaker, and consultant, and he is a faculty affiliate at the College of Charleston. In addition to his work in education, for over a decade, he's been the weekly columnist for the Chicago Tribune, writing about books and the habit of reading as his alter ego, the Rhetorical. In 2021, which is when I first learned about John and his work, he started an associated Substack newsletter called The Rhetorical Recommends, which was a Substack featured publication in 2021. In addition to the books I already mentioned, as you can tell by now, John is a writer, and he's quite prolific in the amount that he writes, not only in the different columns that he writes every week. It's almost mind-boggling, the amount of words that he writes every week. He's also got 5 other books to mention here, including Washington Post #1 bestseller, My First Presidentiary, a scrapbook of George W. Bush, which was co-authored with Kevin Guilfoyle, a parody of writing advice books called Fondling Your Muse, Infallible Advice from a Published Author to the Writerly Aspirant, a novel, The Funny Man, and a collection of short stories, Tough Day for the Army. His fiction, humor, essays, and commentary have been published in dozens of outlets, including Slate, The Washington Post, and Salon. Our format for tonight's lecture will be similar to what we had for the first lecture. We'll first hear a short presentation by John to kind of get us on the same page and maybe stoke our curiosity a little bit, and we'll have a conversation following that presentation with Kyle Thompson, our Director of Learning Programs here at Mudd, and then we'll conclude with some Q&A. So with that out of the way, please join me in giving a warm Harvey Mudd welcome to John Warner.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Is this good? Volume okay? Thumbs up. Button my coat properly. I did a talk last month like this, where I had it buttoned in the wrong button the entire time. So that's good. This has been a real pleasure to be here. You guys sort of know this, I think, but this is a unique place. I go to a lot of different institutions. As you heard from Josh, I've taught at a lot of different places. And even in just the day here, talking to folks from different disciplines and different points of view, It's really incredible. And having read Josh's work about this stuff, I'm impressed would be the wrong word. I'm kind of, I don't know, awestruck might be the right way. So I am going to talk very briefly about some of my beliefs around mostly generative AI. This sort of become a shorthand for AI, or AI is a shorthand for generative AI. And learning, particularly around teaching writing, which is what I spend most of my time doing and thinking about. And I want to do an exercise first to prove that AI doesn't write like a human. I am going to, I don't know how many people are in here, but at least 150 of you, if there's 200 of you, at least 150 of you, I'm going to have you time travel. I'm going to put you in another time, in another place, and I'm going to do it with 2 words. Are you ready? You're sure? All right. So here come the 2 words. 2 words, I want you to sort of clear your mind so you're ready for this, right? So when you hear the 2 words, you can, you're there. You're where I've put you, just with the power of these words. You guys ready? Okay, here are the words. Cinnamon rolls. Who went somewhere? Show of hands, show of hands. Who feels, okay, weird, wow. This works incredibly well. Sometimes I do fried chicken. That works pretty well too. Cinnamon rolls. Why do cinnamon rolls? Now, when I type in cinnamon rolls to ChatGPT, as I do occasionally just to test it, it gives me a description of cinnamon rolls that actually does make me hungry. Talks about how they're golden brown and cream cheese frosting and all that good stuff. But when I think cinnamon rolls, I am transported to the corridor between terminals 1 and 2 in O'Hare Airport, where there used to be a Cinnabon. And there has not been probably for 15 years, but this was when I was living in Chicago, traveling frequently for work. And every time I would go, sometimes I would have 3 flights a week to different places, sometimes like day trips on flights, where I'd have to pass it twice in one day, sometimes at like 8:30 p.m. and have to try to not eat a Cinnabon. How many, you can smell it, right? Maybe it's not Cinnabon for you. It might be like a kitchen at your grandmother's house or your home or something like that. ChatGPT has no association with anything when you type cinnamon rolls into it. We know it's not human. I don't know if this is news to people. This was exciting news to me. Audrey Waters is writing a book. Audrey Waters is an independent scholar who wrote a book called Teaching Machines, A History of Personalized Learning, and she has been out of the education technology writing game for several years. She used to, her nickname was the EdTech Cassandra, because if you know your Greek mythology, do you guys know what Cassandra was known for? Correctly predicting doom, but not being listened to. And there's a whole collection of Audrey's writing on her previous blog where some new EdTech geegaw would come out and she would say, this is going to be a disaster. And then 18 months later, it was a disaster. And she would explain exactly why. And she wrote this book, Teaching Machines. And she said, I've had enough of this. Nobody's listening to me. I'm getting out. But in her newsletter the other day, she said, I'm going to write a book, and she's going to write a book about teaching machines and personalized learning and the history of these things. And in the context of AI. And this is her method for writing a book. I read a lot. I read stuff online, sure. I read books. I underline, I make notes in the margins. I've started an annotated bibliography that's not just good or bad, but this is what I'm thinking when I read this. This is the same thing I would tell my first-year college students to do. But what it made me think, what questions it raised, answered, where I need to go next, and I compile a list of good, meaty quotations that I might want to include a reference. I think, as sometimes the young people say, I felt seen by this quote. She describes my method, although mine's not so organized. I open browser tabs and then just leave them open forever. I'm not so disciplined. So what she described is what, to me, writing is. So what is writing? Well, one thing writing, I'm confident of writing is thinking. The act of writing is inextricable from thinking. It's not the only way to think, but if you're going to write, you are going to be thinking. And this is on two dimensions. One is when we write, we are trying to express an idea. We have a notion, we want to communicate it. I do this, some people do this. Maybe some people do the stone tablet and chisel still, I don't know. We're trying to express an idea, but also, and I know the people in this room have experienced this, while you are writing, the idea is altering. It is taking a different shape. It is forming. So the idea you think you had is no longer the idea. That is the act of thinking. We discover as we write. Because of this, we have to see writing as a both iterative, that is step by step or sequence after sequence, and recursive, that is we go back to earlier parts of the process. One of the beliefs I have to short circuit in the students that I worked with is they read the writing we have in class like, well, I could never do that. And I have to remind them, well, that wasn't that when it was first written down. The linearity of writing is an illusion after the fact. And so when we see ChatGPT produce something in seconds, just down the page, like, oh, that's clearly better than I am. But really what we should be seeing it as is a indicator that it's not writing. Writing is also feeling. It's not a purely intellectual exercise. We feel things as we write. We process feelings through write. We re-experience the world as we write. If I were to write about cinnamon rolls, I would feel hungry. I would go in the time machine. If I write about certain pieces of music, I will go back to like where I was in time and place when I was listening to that music. This is our lives, right? Re-experience through writing. Writing also shapes our values and worldviews. As we do it, the world is revealed to us and our beliefs may be altered by this. We come to know our world better. Writing also connects us to ourselves and others. This is true, I think, no matter, we say, oh, some writing doesn't matter. I have this anecdote in my book. I'll share it here. While I was working on the book, I was shopping. I was in my local Publix, and there was a Post-it on the tile on the ground, and I picked it up, and it had a list of grocery items, and one of the items was cherry Pop-Tarts. It was the only item in all caps, underlined 3 times with 2 exclamation points after it. Clearly, somebody had brought home non-cherry Pop-Tarts. So think of the shopper who, in creating that list, had a moment of reflection on the person they're shopping for, and even connection. Something as mundane as a shopping list Post-it still can carry this meaning if we produce it, if we don't let our smart fridge tell us what we're out of. Writing is communicating, obviously. When we write inside of a rhetorical situation of message, audience, purpose. This is true even if we're writing a diary. We might not have an outside audience, but we are our own audience. There is no rhetorical intention in a large language model. They cannot work from those principles. Syntax generation, which is what a large language model like ChatGPT is capable of, happens entirely absent intention. It's pattern matching. It's like just a big syntax retrieval. It's like sometimes I think of like a really eager dog that likes to fetch. And you go through your prompt and you say fetch. And it goes and brings back the syntax that satisfies the prompt. That's how these things work. And knowing that it works that way, we can absolutely understand that there's no intention behind it. And sometimes that communication is with ourselves. My first impulse, anything I write, Josh is very flattering about my output, but I primarily write to understand the world for myself. I am now in the position that I worked hard at for many years to be able to share that stuff with the world and make money doing it. But there were years where that was not the case, and I still wrote just about as much because I needed to in order to understand the world. So human writing is a unique experience. Part of it is because we do have the sensory capacity for the world. Like we can smell the cinnamon rolls when I say cinnamon rolls. We have that sense memory. That's part of who we are. And those experiences are encoded in our sense memory in ways that, like, you'll smell something you haven't smelled for years and all of a sudden you'll be there. Or you'll hear a sound. If you've ever had the experience of, like, maybe a loved one has departed, but there's a recording of your voice and you didn't know that it was going to be played, and you hear it and you get just an unbelievable shock through your body. These are all part of the human experience. We have also the capacity for reflection and metacognition. We learn from our own experience. We can train an agent, a GPT or a language model, but it's not learning in the way we learn. The other thing that I think is important to remember is that every human is a unique intelligence. Generative AI is by definition a flattener of intelligence. It's a averaging of what's frequent. We should not mistake that it has access to all of this volumes of information for actual expertise. Like, sure, it can speak fluently on all kinds of things I know nothing about, but it cannot outdo me in my areas of expertise. So at the end of my book, I have a framework for how I think we should deal with these things. Resist, renew, explore. And first, some resists, my recommendations. I think we should resist anthropomorphizing AI because this is automation, not intelligence. Emily Bender, who you'll be hearing from next month, this is her. I quote her many times in my book. I agree with her. And the reason we should resist anthropomorphizing AI is because when we say it reasons or it learns, it's not doing what we do. So calling it that is a mistake. The AI whisperers for corporations will say, no, you have to anthropomorphize them. That's how you get the best outputs. And I personally am uninterested in that part of the equation as somebody who is involved in education and learning. We should resist crediting the hypothetical potential to the present reality. One of the things that's happening over and over is OpenAI releases a new fancy thing. We're like, oh my God, it's over. Every movie's going to be AI. They released that Sora video generator in February. We have not seen hide nor hair of it since. Is that going to be the future of filmmaking? We have no idea. Is it amazing when we see it? Yes, but we don't. When they say someday it will be able to do this, we have no idea if that's true. And we should resist believing it until it is true. We should resist technological determinism, that this education is inevitable. 2 examples, if anyone remembers the massive open online course. This was going to close, according to the supporters of this, the believers in this, it was going to close all but 50 universities. You guys might have made the cut because, like, as a niche, but basically any large state university was going to be put out of business by MOOCs. Didn't happen. They misunderstood what learning is. It's not information delivery. Smartphones is something we should have probably resisted in schools when we had the chance. But we didn't. We could have. It was not inevitable that this become a problem. So we should not give into that sort of logic or non-logic. I also believe we should resist giving human labor over to AI automation. Something like grading to me is my job as the writing teacher. AI can't read, therefore it cannot grade, because grading involves reading. And this is true in all kinds of other categories of AI, right? Like in Hollywood, the scriptwriters, when they went on strike, a huge part was like, you are not going to replace us with AI. Or if you try to, we're going to make it hard for you to do so. To renew, I think we have to renew our relationship to the experience of work, to Be more in touch with the process rather than just generating a product. We learn through experience. We live through experience. The book, Why They Can't Write, Killing the 5-Paragraph Essay and Other Necessities, this was born out of me teaching students who had been trained to write like an algorithm by filling a template on a 5-paragraph essay. This made them alienated from writing and expression in themselves and their own experience of the world. The ChatGPT can churn that crap out is unsurprising. But why are we churning that crap out? Crap is crap. Let's not do that. Education is more than a transaction. It's not just getting a credential and doing stuff and that. It's an experience through which we learn, through which it's like an experience of becoming. And it's one that doesn't stop once you're done with college either. Renew our appreciation of difference, the unique intelligence. There's real value in understanding that everybody has a different perspective. Individuals are not averages. Universities have spent a lot of money trying to treat individuals like averages on things like what you should major in or who's going to enroll. We have to maintain our individual selves. And then renew our focus on taste discernment. If we can decide what's good and not good with our human sense, we don't have to worry about ChatGPT or large language models taking over, because unless and until they can meet that threshold, they are not a threat. Appreciation, like why is this good, or why does, not even good, why does this move me? Why is this compelling to me? That's a good skill to understand that, I think. Explore, while I am something of a skeptic, it is a subject that we have to continue to explore collaboratively. It's a public problem. This is not something that's just for individuals to figure out. You should explore the work of people who can help guide you. I spend a lot of time reading the people I disagree with on this subject as a challenge to my own thinking and as a prod to articulate why I might disagree with them. We should explore the uses of AI that enhance our fundamental human selves, not as a substitute. We were talking beforehand, a term Josh uses, engage. Engage, not integrate. And then explore our unique capacities as agents in the world. What are we here to do? I get up at I feel like an extraordinarily lucky person. I get up every morning basically looking forward to what I have to do that day. And the reason that's come about is because I'm very bad at doing things I don't want to do because I'm lazy. And so over the years, I've iterated towards a career that allows me to do these things. That's me exercising my agency. I'm overcoming my own laziness by being agentic. So here's where I sort of agree with Sal Khan, who I actually think has a fundamentally different worldview about this stuff. He said, I believe this was the title of his talk, right? AI won't destroy education, it'll save it. That second phrase I'm not so sure about, but the first part I agree. AI won't destroy education. As I say, the first thing I said, you see the date there, ChatGPT was released on like November 20th or something. So it's a couple weeks after it appeared. I wrote this, ChatGPT can't kill anything worth preserving. I still believe that. What can kill it is us. People, right? And maybe we'll get into this when we talk about, like, one of the things we could kill with this stuff is the planet. And so we really have to be thoughtful about its use because of the consequences of not doing it. Generative AI has no agency. It can't do anything we don't allow it to do. And this is why we have to deal with these things. One of the opportunities is that I think this technology reveals some things we spend our time doing is probably not worth continuing to do. If ChatGPT can do it, and it's as good and indistinguishable from the human output, my first question is, does that thing need to exist? What is the purpose of that thing? It allows us to refocus on the essential human aspects and the experience of learning. Because the product and the transaction and the outcome is if that's not reliable, we have to focus on the experience. So AI can't destroy education, but we can if we're not careful. And in fact, as I write in my previous book, Why They Can't Write, we've done a pretty good job of destroying learning in schools, often through well-meaning ideas about school, but by forgetting that learning is an experience. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we're gonna talk now. So thank you for this kind attention, and let's have some more conversation.
All right, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. This is a really important conversation, and especially someone involved in writing, I really appreciate your views. I actually wanted to start with a quote and have you defend it. No, I think it captures a lot of what I was reading in your online writing. You're so mild-mannered here, and it's a little more punchy. Concluding that generative AI tutors can and should be used to aid students in their writing is an announcement that you have given up on the work of education. So maybe contextualize.
Well, yeah, so the context of that was something that's going on at Arizona State University, where they were essentially moving towards an automated first-year writing course. This is their goal. And they're very excited about it. And I got mad when I read about it. And I think that's the tweet. I ended up writing a sort of more coherent blog post that was more considered and more reasoned. But my first thought is like, why? What is a life of going to college and saying, oh, I'm going to give you credit for your first year writing course by writing a bunch of stuff that's responded to by a chatbot? What is the point of that? Other than an accredited university is going to be willing to give you a credential for that. And it just offended my sense of like, I don't know, living, the sort of like massification of credentialing. I won't even give it the credit of education, because I think it's an affront to that notion. But that's the kind of thing, in terms of this question of agency, that I think we have to be aware of. Like, if you're a student in the marketplace of education, where students are consumers, unfortunately, I think to our own detriment, we see it that way. I think because I see a lot of student-age people here, assuming you guys are students, I think when your sensibilities for what you want from your life are offended by what the institution is offering you, you say stuff. And about whatever. That's a necessary component of it. And it sort of just offended me that they were going to tell students, like, this is what we have to offer you, and you're going to pay for that. And we'll give you a degree. I don't believe it.
I think related to that, one of the retorts that I often hear is, in an ideal world, students can get the kind of education where they're working with human tutors. And in fact, Saul Khan, our previous speaker, had mentioned, given the choice between an AI tutor and a human tutor, he's going to opt for the human tutor. But this concern about equity, and maybe some students in high school, college, don't have access to the resources that could elevate their education. So this is proposed as promoting equity. What do you think of that?
So Jane Rosenzweig, who's the director of the Harvard Writing Center, uses a framework for talking about these issues, where she asks, what problem is the AI solving? And so I don't know if he said it here, but in a previous talk that I saw, Sal Khan talked about the teacher who has 180 essays to grade and how that's impossible to do. And so this is going to help that teacher do that grading. Well, using Jane Rosenzweig's framework, her problem is she has too many students. And so this idea of that equity is going to be solved by giving students that can't afford or are not given access to a human tutor, access to an AI tutor, I promise you, the rich kids will still have human tutors. I used to, I've been writing negative things about Bill Gates' involvement in education for quite some time now, essentially as long as Bill Gates has been involved in education. And when he was doing one of his previous initiatives, I wrote a very snotty blog post that said, this was around the MOOC time. Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, wrote a very positive, he's like, MOOCs are the future and blah, 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 blah. It says, as soon as Thomas Friedman sends his kids to MOOC University, I will believe in MOOCs. But Thomas Friedman is not going to give up the cultural, I think his daughters went to UPenn or some Ivy League school. So this idea like we can't afford to do this thing, so we're going to do this other thing, I think is just a broken logic. I think it's a rationale. And I also would ask us, in terms of this in the context of generative AI, I would ask us to look at the economic context of opportunity costs. Millions of dollars are going towards making Conmigo accessible in schools across the country. Literally, perhaps more than that. If we computed the free compute that Microsoft is giving to Conmigo to run these tutors, it could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Sam Altman of OpenAI has asked for $7 trillion to train his AI models for the chips. They need the more powerful chips. 7 trillion, think about 7 trillion for a minute. $7 trillion is 7 times what the United States spends annually on all of education, from kindergarten through every postgraduate school, medical school. 7 times what we spend in a year, $7 trillion. It's more than the combined annual GDPs of the UK and Germany together. This is an unfathomable amount of money. If we put even $1 trillion into education, it would be transformative. Another, like doubled the spending we have on education, imagine. He wants 7 times that. So this idea that this thing is our savior, right? That somehow, because we can't do this other thing, we need AI. I just think it's absolutely broken logic, and I think it's a rationale. Again, not saying that, as I said, I think we should experiment. We should see what these things can do. But assuming this potential before it's proven is, I don't know, doesn't make sense to me.
Great. I think related to this experimentation and how we might make use of these tools, another conversation that I hear a lot is, well, these tools are here. They're going to be around. Students have them available. They can use them. Not MUD students, obviously. But should they be working with the tools to be prepared for life outside of college, even if the intention isn't solely to prepare you for a vocation?
Yeah, I mean, so this is where I fall back on the agent part. Like if students are using it in a way where they are the agent exploring the tool, God bless, right? I think that's simply a process of learning as we would do with anything else. But the idea that the future is inevitably AI, again, is not proven. The idea that learning AI as soon as possible somehow makes you better prepared for the future, right? I see some people who, like me, have some years on them in the audience. Like I went to college with a personal word product. I didn't have a computer. Like it displayed 30 characters of text. The internet didn't come about till I was done with graduate school. I managed to adjust. ChatGPT was not widely available until November of 2022. Anybody who says they're using generative AI to improve their work today did not have access to it until then. So they learned a whole bunch of stuff prior to that that allows them to use it well now. What is that stuff, right? What is it that allows them to use it? The idea that we will be subservient to the AI, like we're the technician who controls the AI. I think that's backwards. I think that's ceding not just ceding our agency, but our expertise, our humanity. And just from a practical sense, I think it would make you less, ultimately, I don't like the word employable, but less adaptable in a consumer working employment world. That's my theory anyway, but I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. That's why I say let's not give credit to the future until we know what's gonna happen.
Because your work is on writing, I feel like I justified making an even finer point on that. So a student sitting down to think through a writing project, and at what moment do you want them to be conscious of what it means to outsource to AI? You know, someone might go, oh, I'm just going to use it to brainstorm, just get some ideas on the page, I'll take it from there. Or I'll start the outline, let it, quote, flesh out the paragraphs. Where would you suggest people should be worried about, you know, depriving themselves of developing these skills in the writing process?
The whole time. You know, some of the early uses I was seeing where my students really struggle with the first draft, so I'm having them have it write a first draft and then they're editing the draft. I'm sorry, this is ass backwards. The first draft is where the bulk of the thinking happens. And the idea that we're going to like move syntax around is not the same thing as thinking. And I don't blame students in a school context where the product is the thing that's going to get graded and they're under time pressure and they got a lot of stuff going on, to reaching for that tool under those circumstances. We have to be mindful about how do we create an atmosphere where their use of that tool is purposeful beyond avoidance of the thing that they should be doing. I wrote a blog post recently. It felt like an epiphany, even though it was obvious. And the title of the post was "Writing Should Be Hard." That's how you know you're doing it correctly. And a great thing for students to experience is the difficulty of writing. And then having it be difficult and persevering. That's a good thing. I mean, outside of writing, that's sort of life, right? I think, you know, one of the things that disservices writers have done to the world is moan and lament how hard writing is. That writers have it so hard, right? Like stare at the page until blood forms on my forehead. That's a quote about writing. Writing is hard, but it's also hugely, hugely satisfying. And the only reason it's satisfying is the difficulty. If you remove the difficulty, the satisfaction, and this is true of stuff that's not writing, right? You all have stuff you do in your lives that's difficult, and you persevere, and then you overcome. You're like, that was awesome. I'm so glad I did that. Maybe I don't want to do it again, or no time soon. But it's the perseverance that matters. So depriving students of that, I think, in and of itself has some potential downsides.
Excellent. In the lunch earlier, we were talking about the role of reading, and I think that sometimes gets left out of this conversation, understandably. GPT produces text, so we think of it as doing the writing. How do you see reading fitting into this, and are you concerned about like what content people are reading, or yeah, how do you think about reading?
So I go back to that extract from Audrey Waters' newsletter where she's talking about her process for writing this book, right? I read everything. And so that reading is thinking, just like writing is. It's like taking on the fuel that's ultimately going to come out when you do the writing. And reading is necessary for that. And now I'm not an expert in reading. I know much more about writing, but I know the relationship between reading and writing. And I have many concerns around the way reading has been instrumentalized in school contexts around content regurgitation or very shallow encounters with text that do not give students the necessary opportunity of exactly what Audrey Waters is doing when she does that book. That is using reading as fodder for writing and thinking. And all students can have that. And you can have it. I share this anecdote in all my books. I've done it hundreds of times, but I'll do it here. I learned to write in 3rd grade, Mrs. Goldman's class, Greenbrier School, Northbrook, Illinois, 1977. She asked us to write instructions for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then she brought in the fixings for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And we had to try to make our sandwiches following our own directions literally. So there's a picture of me, and I have it up on my newsletter. It's my avatar on my newsletter. It actually might be in the Writer's Practice. One of the books for sale here too. There's a picture of me with my hand dipped into a giant jar of Centrella brand peanut butter, which was the Jewel brand in Chicago. Dipping in there, huge grin on my face while I'm doing it. Even though that was the year I didn't smile because my teeth were so jacked up from a skateboard accident. One stuck out straight, the other was crooked, and I would get braces the next year to correct those, and then again, and then again. But I'm having a good time doing this. And I had an epiphany that day about writing in Mrs. Goldman's class where I was like, oh, this matters. Somebody could use this. I was in 3rd grade. And I thought that was in my head for the rest of my entire schooling. In 4th grade, when we had to write a report on a state, I thought, my best friend who used to live here lives in Minnesota. I want people to know how awesome Minnesota is because Jeff lives there. And my goal is not to just copy something out of the World Book Encyclopedia about Minnesota. My object is to tell them how awesome Minnesota is. So this is not like a sophistication that only belongs to people like Audrey Waters. This is a fundamental human thing, and it starts with reading. And it starts with being allowed to read in ways that go beyond often the way school asks us to read or requires us to read.
For the record, there's absolutely nothing wrong with eating peanut butter that way.
I forgot to say use a knife, right? And then the amounts. I didn't say the amounts. So she made us just keep putting it on until Mrs. Goldman was no longer amused. She's still around. I found her. She lives in Florida. I hope she's evacuating right now. I send her all my books with an inscription because she changed my life. Absolutely.
So I have so many more things I could ask you. I want to turn it over now to the audience and get some of your questions. So we have this fancy QR code, and you can go ahead and send in the questions. And maybe while that's happening, I'll ask you one more about, it's obviously a messy conversation, how a campus thinks about, we have an honor code here, or plagiarism policies. Have you found a model that you think can cope with it? He just shakes his head no. Yeah.
No,
yeah, why is that?
The model of like an honor code, or I think that's the best you can do. What I know is you cannot police its use. You can't detect it reliably. Even if you could, what a waste of time, honestly. Like, I didn't become a teacher to become like a spy or a cop. And like when I was teaching, I never used Turnitin or anything like that either, because like, I don't know, you put one past me, good on you. Like, I don't think you can. I mean, also because like I was making all this process stuff and reflection, like you really would have had to plan to cheat in my class before you ever enrolled. ChatGPT, you could use it, but ultimately, my message to students is like, this is your education. Like if you want to waste your time outsourcing your education to a large language model, I don't want to say God bless because I think it's a terrible choice, but it's your choice. And if you think like, oh, I'm just here to get the credentials so I can go get a job in the world and I won't have learned jack by the time you get out there because all I can do is this, you will run up against the limits. and you'll be like, holy crap, I wish I'd actually done something. So while I understand the pressures that lead students to use it, and we want to reduce the incentives around using it, ultimately trying to police it, I think, is a problem. It's really the culture of learning that I think you have to build, and an honor code is as good a way to try to do that as anything.
That's great. Maybe coupling that with a Dead Poet Society stand on the desk. I tried those features,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think they're the best way. Here's the first question. And I don't see the name, so we're just going to go with it. You said we should explore uses of AI that enhance essential human work rather than substitute for it. What are some examples of this?
Well, no, so in a lot of ways, I think like writing is one of the worst possible applications for generative AI technology. Like if you've seen like the AlphaGo AI stuff, it folds proteins or whatever. I don't quite understand it, but it does exactly what humans do in the exact way humans would do it, but much faster. So it can make these discoveries, right? So when it can substitute for rote human labor, which is what that becomes, then I think it could have some use. Like I would use, if I was still teaching, if I was a faculty member, and I had to do my annual faculty activity report, which is a pure regurgitation of the CV that I keep updated on a quarterly basis, that then has to be plugged into our system, I would outsource that stuff in a heartbeat. Because all it is a regurgitation of what I've already done and a pure translation. If I was still, I used to work in market research, if I still did that and I had to write a summary text for a data table, which is again, just pure, no interpretation, no analysis, I would use it for that and then I would double check it didn't hallucinate. So it does have some of those kind of labor saving potential, but the danger is when we confuse the labor we have to be doing with what ChatGPT does. And that's not an easy thing to always figure out. I don't want to take too much time in this answer because I'm sure there's other questions, but here's a quick example I use in the book. Student recommendations of students. Hugely tempting to outsource to a ChatGPT. They're formulaic. They often feel pro forma, like nobody's going to read this thing anyway. But here's what I'll say. Writing a recommendation of a student is not just about checking a box to say, I approve of this student. Writing a recommendation for a student, when I do it, requires me to remind myself, who is this person? Which puts me back in the stuff they've written. I have like digital copies of everything my students have written. I look at my feedback to them. I conjure them. It forces me to reflect on like the teacher I was when they were in my class. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, was I still doing that then? I guess they're okay with it because they're asking me for a recommendation. But it's an opportunity to reflect on who I am as a teacher and instructor while I'm reflecting on the student. And that's not inconsequential. Because ultimately the way I evolved how I teach writing was a byproduct of that, thinking about my own teaching. And so as tempting as it might be to see some of these things as purely, just pro forma transactional, they may not be. They may not be.
If you tell students it'll be a GPT letter, just look at their eyes.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're like, really? What? You know, and I had a professor when I needed recommendations for graduate school. I really only had one professor who I knew or remembered. This guy, Philip Graham, and he was he's the professor who changes your life, right? He believed in me even when I wasn't worth much belief. And when I called him a couple years after I graduated and said, I think I want to go back to school to write, he was encouraged, come on down, drive down, let's have lunch, we're going to talk about it. But then I needed a second recommendation. And that professor said, you write it and I'll sign it. And it's just deflating, right? It's like, like Does this guy hate his job? Does he hate me? That's kind of what we're saying to them if we let GPT do it.
That first question was Aiden, found that, thank you. Next up, an AM Turing. No, I'm just kidding. This is Tom. You'll see why. What would AI have to do to be able to convince you that it was using AI to teach or tutor a student?
What would AI have to do to convince me? I mean, it's not that students couldn't learn engaging with an AI tutor or they couldn't be helpful. There's research around sort of Khan Academy's stuff that shows the students who used it did improve more than students who didn't. Now, there's a big problem around the students who use it. There's something called the 5% problem, where only 5% of students tend to use these technological interventions. The other 95% don't use them, which is one of my chief sources of skepticism about AI tutors. So it's not like they couldn't. The same way like I learned about how our government works by watching the Schoolhouse Rock videos on ABC when I was a kid. You can learn doing anything. The question is proportions, occasions, purpose, and the designs. You know, I know like Sal Khan. I read his book. He says this is not going to substitute for teachers. I believe he believes that. I'm also aware of the capitalist structures of America. And if we start having studies that say students learn as well from a tutor bot as they do a human, there will be lots of people saying get rid of the human teachers. And those studies, we have to remember, those studies will be hugely limited and flawed and narrow and not reflective of what learning means. The same way that we narrowed the curriculum, we got rid of music and art and recess so we could score better on certain tests. We have to be very cognizant of these things before we outsource to a AI experience.
Excellent. And I think this will be our last one. It connects to what you were just talking about. And it's a big one in these last few minutes. Do you think that the problem of the use of AI in education is fundamentally rooted in the fact that education is commonly transactional? And if so, do you have any ideas of how we can enforce a less transactional form of education? 2 minutes, go.
Yes. The short answer is yes. We've turned, I just wrote a blog post about this. We've turned education into one big transaction. I say this in both Why They Can't Write in my next book. We've turned education into a system of indefinite future reward, where everything you're doing in school is for some benefit in the future. You learn this so you can do this. You learn this so you can do this. You're in college so you can go get a job. And instead, I have a much longer answer on this, but since we're running out of time, my shorter answer is to focus on the experience of learning itself. As I say in Why They Can't Write, life is to be lived, including the ages from 5 to 18. I'm talking about K-12 in that book. And so the idea that we're going to forestall interesting experiences or engaging experiences. I told the story at lunch. There was a school in the New York suburbs that canceled the kindergarten pageant. This was in 2014 because they had to spend more time helping the kindergartners get college and career ready. The idea, I hope that we would see that today as absolute madness, like lost our minds bonkers. But the idea that we're going to make education more efficient through tutoring, or it's the same mindset. So the experience of learning should be rewarding in and of itself, independent of the grade, independent of the credential, simply for its own sake. And that doesn't mean it's going to be like entertaining. It doesn't mean your professor's going to like song and dance. It doesn't mean everything is going to be just unicorns and rainbows. It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. But those things are what become meaningful. So the experience of learning. That's my Short answer. Focus on that.
John, thank you.
Thank you.